Hi guys, so I know a lot of you are concerned about your learning objectives and making sure that as you create your final unit plan, you have your learning objectives set up accurately. So I know there's a lot that goes into this, and I'll try the best I can to explain it concisely yet thoroughly. And if you have any questions after you've watched the video, please just reach out through TD number 7 or via email, because a lot of you might have specific concerns about your specific unit. So let me just start with this. This is what's on the screen right now, is what I had given you guys a couple classes ago. And I think this is probably the best tool for you to use if you're still concerned about creating your learning objectives. Really use this, and try to follow my advice here. I think it really should help. And one thing it says right here is keep in mind that the process is not sequential, even though we try to plan backwards. Sometimes as you go through and you are creating this unit overall, you may have to go back and say, oh, I have to adapt my learning objectives because as I'm creating my summative or as I'm creating my rubric, I'm realizing I didn't teach this and I need to go back and make sure I've taught that idea somewhere. So just know that it's always a work in process, even after you've taught it to the students. So just do the best you can. Just keep that in mind. So if you still feel like you haven't figured out exactly how to create your learning objectives, look at this section here, which reminds you that you already have done a lot of work with your UBD. So if you're using the same standards that you did on your UBD, then go back, look at what you've done with the unpacking of the standards. First, make sure that you fully unpacked them, because some of you could still work on that. So fully unpack your standards, make sure what they say is accounted for and what they imply, some things that you might have to teach to get them to know and do those things are all listed in your unpacked section of your UBD. Once you do that, use that section to just start to create simple learning objectives. And I'll show you an example of that. This is the UBD that I had given you guys way back when you first did your UBD. This is an example one that I created, and I'll use the same one to kind of walk you through the steps. So these are my 3 standards. This is all my unpacking that I had done here. So I'm going to start by just looking at what I said the students should know and be able to do, and try to create learning objectives for all of these. And it might take me a while. I may have to draft it a couple of times, but this is how I would encourage you to start. So if I take this away, I would encourage you to start this way that I've started. So start to draft them really simply. Don't worry about putting them in the perfect order yet. Don't worry about having, all 4 criteria yet. I would say step 1 is just type little things. Students will be able to, and then just bullet out some of your unpacked skills and concepts that might fit together. So you'll see here, if you read my list, I tried to take my UBD, my unpacked skills and concepts, and I just tried to bullet out every single one of them. So, I didn't necessarily have analysis on my UBD, but as I was thinking about it, if they're going to have to learn cumulative impact, this idea that all the little pieces of a text impact the overall message or the overall tone, I know they're going to have to really understand what analysis is, and the idea they have to break something down to then figure out what it means as a whole. So I added that in here. So define analysis and cumulative impact, to consider cumulative impact when analyzing a short text through guided annotation. So that's me saying, okay, I'm going to check off. If I go back to my UBD, I could actually have this printed out in front of me, and I could check off or highlight or cross out this idea, right? The cumulative impact right here. I could say, yep, I've accounted for that. And if there's anything over here, I haven't quite yet talked about determining the meaning of a text, so maybe I can't cross that off yet. But I would actually encourage you guys to do this, to have your UBD printed out, and whether you're a person who likes to type or whether you're a person who likes to handwrite, just start to go through and draft learning objectives and start to cross out the pieces of your UBD that you're hitting on. So you should do that. That will help. And then, I'm not going to read all of these. You guys can read all of these here, but I tried to account for every single thing on my UBD And I'm not even sure yet, if this is my first draft, I'm not even sure yet that each one would be a lesson. I'm going to worry about that when I start to order them. Then I can think about, geez, would that take a whole lesson, or would that actually need to be more than one day? Do I want it to be a 2-day lesson, or should it be split up into 2 objectives? Should I combine some of these? That's going to be part of the process of writing them. So please don't think that it's one and done, that you can just write your learning objectives, or any teacher can, because they can't. It's a process of figuring out, okay, here's what I want my students to know and be able to do. Here's how I could put it into daily targets, essentially, is what you're creating, a target for each day or each lesson. So you just draft it out first, and after you've drafted them all out and you've crossed off all the pieces of your unpacked standards on your UBD, and you think you've accounted for everything, I would say step 2 would be to order them. So you would just think about, okay, out of all of these things, what makes the most sense? What is the most foundational that I would have to pick first and give as a first lesson? This one seems to make sense if I use this first one up here. If the whole unit is going to be about breaking down the language of text that we're reading, and then eventually using that knowledge to create your own texts with specific language, this makes the most sense to use this as number 1. So, I might, copy, and then I might paste that down as my number 1. And then I might, whoops, my bullets got all messed up there. And then I might look and see, okay, what makes sense to go next? I have, the order I wrote them in. It says define context and use context clues to determine meanings of unknown words. And maybe it's a lot about, this whole thing is about diction. It's about word choice, and that's a simpler concept. So that's what I'm going to try to think about when I'm ordering my objectives, is what seems more simple, or what seems foundational, what seems like it makes sense for students to know and be able to do first. So you can think about that. You can think about using the taxonomy too. What do they have to first understand before they can apply? So, some of the other standards, explain how diction impacts tone, using a piece of literature. They can't necessarily do that until they understand diction in and of itself. They understand, how to determine word meanings, determine the denotation, which is the word meaning. So they have to know that there's a connotation, and that, word choice itself is called diction. So they'd have to know all of this before they could apply that knowledge later on. So as you're ordering your objectives, think about what makes the most sense for students to know first before they can perform a skill, or what skill is more foundational than the next skill, or do they have to be able to apply basic knowledge in one way before they can create their own version of something. So use your taxonomy, use your knowledge of your discipline, and figure out what makes the most sense. So I might, before I even get into the word choice piece, I noticed that one of the things I need to go over is style and elements that impact style. And since that is a more broad overarching idea that all of these are going to fall into, I feel like I want them to know this first, because the elements that impact style are going to be all of these things that we talk about. So for them to know, oh, listen, diction impacts style, and syntax, and some of the other complex ideas, it'll help open doors to learning about these things. So I might actually put that as my second one. And I would just go through and do that for all of these objectives until I have them all in order. And I might realize as I'm going through, I know what some of my later on ones are. So I might, just kind of space down, and as you do that, there's no clear process. You may realize that, oh, you know what, I want this to be my last one. Like, they're not going to create an original text using figurative language until way later on. So I'm just going to put that down here. And, as you do it, you'll come up with an order that you think makes the most sense. And then after you have ordered them all in a learning progression that you think makes sense from one day to the next, then go ahead and turn them into strong learning objectives with all the 4 criteria that I've taught you about, the way we've written learning objectives, your condition, this, using a provided reading passage, that's under which condition, your knowledge, what essential knowledge, define context, so that's their knowledge, the skills, they could underline context clues, determine word meanings, and their criteria for success. So they have to do it independently and accurately. And I could probably even make this better by saying, underline at least 3, right? So then I have a better criteria for success. It's more measurable, it's stronger. So you would do that for every single learning objective. Make sure you really have a reasonable condition that makes sense with the lesson plan you would deliver. You have the knowledge, the skills listed as needed, and you do have criteria for success that ensures that your learning objective is measurable and you'll be able to see, do the students meet this target at the end of the lesson or not? Because remember, the whole point of a learning objective is to help you, the teacher, and the students have a target and work toward that target and then adjust the next day if students didn't meet that target. So that's why we want to make it this way. So I hope that helps a little bit with you and your unit planning and your learning objectives. This would be what I would probably suggest you do if you haven't done it yet. Is one of your first steps. And then once you have gone through drafting them and ordering them and trying to turn them into really strong objectives, post them on the thread of discussion and ask for feedback. Say, hey guys, do you think these are in the right order? Do you see any weaknesses in any of my objectives? Is there any clarity issues? And we can all help, and we can make sure that you have a really strong progression as you go through your unit. Now, something else that will help that you might want to do in conjunction with creating your learning objectives is creating your rubrics for your standards. And that'll be the other video on here that I'm going to post here. So think about, maybe creating your rubrics alongside your creation of learning objectives. Do one and then do the other and then kind of go back, and I'll explain why in the rubric video. So thank you for watching. I hope it's been helpful, and like I said, please at any time send out an email, post on the TD number 7 so that you can get the feedback you need and the clarity you need to feel really successful about your unit. So bye guys.